Motherhood is supposed to be a fierce, unconditional shield. But as I watched my son and his designer-clad wife speed out of my driveway, abandoning their 8-year-old adopted daughter on my porch with nothing but a frayed suitcase and a calculated lie, I realized some hearts are simply hollow. Summer in Oak Park, Illinois usually carries a thick, suffocating humidity, but the chill that washed over me that late June morning had absolutely nothing to do with the weather. I was standing on my wraparound porch, wiping my hands on my apron, watching my son's silver Range Rover pull into my driveway. Out hopped Dorian, looking everywhere but at me, followed by his wife, Chloe. Chloe was dressed like she was stepping onto a runway in Milan, not dropping off her child at her mother-in-law's house. She wore oversized Gucci sunglasses, an immaculate white linen pantsuit, and carried a Prada tote that cost more than my first car. And then there was Lily. Sweet, quiet, 8-year-old Lily climbed out of the back seat, dragging a faded, scuffed Disney princess rolling suitcase that she had outgrown 3 years ago. She wore a slightly too small Target t-shirt and a pair of mismatched Converse. Dorian and Chloe had adopted Lily when she was just a year old. At the time, Chloe was highly active on Instagram, heavily involved in mommy blogger circles. After Harrison, their biological son, was born, Chloe suffered a minor medical complication that made her hesitant to carry another child. The adoption of Lily was highly publicized on her social media, complete with a professional photographer, custom hashtags, and long captions about how their family was chosen and complete. But once the likes faded and the reality of raising a traumatized toddler set in, the camera stopped flashing. Behind closed doors, Lily became an accessory they had forgotten to return. "Margaret, you are an absolute lifesaver," Chloe chirped, her voice dripping with that manufactured sweetness I had learned to despise. She leaned in, air-kissing my cheeks, smelling strongly of Baccarat Rouge 540 perfume. I know 2 weeks is a long time, but Harrison's Elite Soccer Academy has this rigorous, invitation-only training camp down in Orlando. It's going to be absolutely grueling. Just endless drills in the Florida heat. Lily would be utterly miserable sitting in the bleachers. Dorian finally looked at me, running a hand through his hair. "Yeah, Mom, it's going to be a lot of driving and hotel living. It's better for Lily to have some quiet bonding time with her favorite grandmother." I looked down at Lily. She was staring at her shoes, her small hands tightly gripping the handle of her cheap suitcase. Harrison, their 10-year-old biological son, didn't even get out of the car. He was in the back, glued to an iPad, wearing brand-new noise-canceling headphones. "Of course," I said, forcing a warm smile for the little girl's sake. I reached out and stroked Lily's dark curls. "Lily and I are going to have a wonderful time. We've got gardening to do, cookies to bake, and movies to watch." "Perfect," Chloe said, clapping her hands together. "We really have to run. Our flight is in 3 hours. Call us if there's an emergency, but coverage might be spotty at the training facility." They didn't hug her. Dorian gave Lily a quick pat on the head, and Chloe blew her a kiss from the driveway. Within 60 seconds, the Range Rover was backing out, leaving Lily and me alone on the porch. We went inside, and I made us some lemonade. I took Lily up to the spare bedroom, the one I had decorated with fairy lights and yellow daisies specifically for her. As I hoisted her little suitcase onto the bed and unzipped it, my heart sank. Her packing was haphazard, a few crumpled shirts, shorts with frayed hems, and a single toothbrush without a travel case. It looked like she had packed it herself. "Did Mommy help you pack, sweetheart?" I asked gently. Lily shook her head. "No." Mommy was busy packing Harrison's tuxedo. My hand stopped moving. I looked over my shoulder at her. Harrison's tuxedo? Why would Harrison need a tuxedo for a soccer camp in Orlando? Lily swung her legs back and forth over the edge of the chair, her brown eyes wide and innocent. "I don't know, Grandma. Mommy said they have fancy dinners on the big ships." "Do they play soccer on big ships?" A cold, heavy stone dropped into the pit of my stomach. "Big ships?" I echoed, keeping my voice painfully steady. "Yeah." Harrison kept bragging about the water slide on the boat and the ice cream bar. Lily's voice cracked just a little, a tiny fissure in her brave facade. "I like ice cream, too." I walked over, wrapped my arms around her small, trembling shoulders, and pressed a kiss to the top of her head. I know you do, baby. We're going to get the biggest ice cream sundaes tonight. How does that sound? She nodded, burying her face into my chest, but I could feel the tension radiating from her little body. Once I got Lily settled with a snack and a cartoon in the living room, I went straight to my study. Dorian had always been somewhat careless with his digital footprint. A few months ago, he had logged into his email on my desktop computer to print some tax documents and had never logged out. I sat down at the keyboard, my hands shaking. I felt a pang of guilt for invading my 35-year-old son's privacy, but the maternal instinct to protect my granddaughter violently overrode it. I clicked open his Gmail and typed Orlando into the search bar. Nothing recent. Then I typed flight. A flurry of emails popped up. The most recent one was from a boutique travel agency in downtown Chicago, addressed to Dorian and Chloe Gable. The subject line read, "Your itinerary, Regent 7 Seas Explorer, 14-night Mediterranean splendor." I clicked it open, my vision swimming. Attached was a lavish PDF document detailing a 2-week cruise departing from Barcelona, sailing to Monaco, Tuscany, Rome, and the Greek Isles. They had booked the Regent Suite, a sprawling, opulent room that the document proudly stated came with a personal butler, in-suite caviar service, and unlimited shore excursions. I scrolled down to the passenger manifest. Passenger 1, Chloe Gable. Passenger 2, Dorian Gable. Passenger 3, Harrison Gable. There was no passenger 4. I scrolled further down to the billing section. The total cost of the trip, $22,450. Paid in full by a wire transfer from an account under the name Dr. Gregory Simmons, Chloe's father. My son hadn't just gone on a luxury vacation without his daughter. He had looked me directly in the eye, spun a pathetic lie about a soccer camp, and abandoned his 8-year-old child because she didn't fit into the Mediterranean aesthetic of his wife's wealthy family. The anger that consumed me in that moment was unlike anything I had experienced in my 62 years of life. I was a retired middle school principal. I had dealt with liars, bullies, and manipulative parents for 3 decades. But to see that level of calculated cruelty orchestrated by the boy I had raised, the boy I had rocked to sleep, whose scraped knees I had bandaged, broke something fundamental inside of me. I needed the full story. I needed to know exactly how deep this rot went before I decided how to tear it out by the roots. I picked up my phone and dialed the one person in Chloe's family who possessed a shred of moral decency, her older sister, Sarah. Sarah Simmons was the black sheep of her old money family, an independent artist living in Seattle who actively avoided her parents' country club lifestyle. She and Chloe tolerated each other at best. Sarah answered on the 3rd ring. "Margaret, to what do I owe the pleasure? Everything okay?" "Hi, Sarah. I'm sorry to bother you. I have Lily here with me." I kept my voice hushed, making sure the study door was firmly shut. "I have a question, and I need you to be completely honest with me. What do you know about this cruise your parents paid for?" There was a long, heavy pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint sound of city traffic through Sarah's phone. "Oh God," Sarah breathed out, her tone laced with immediate dread. "Margaret, please don't tell me they actually left her behind. They dropped her on my porch an hour ago. Told me Harrison had a soccer camp in Florida." "Those absolute bastards," Sarah hissed, her voice rising. "I am so sorry, Margaret. I thought Dorian was going to put his foot down. I really did. Tell me everything, Sarah. Right now." She sighed, a ragged sound of frustration. "My dad booked the Regent 7 Seas cruise for Harrison's 10th birthday. You know how my parents are. Harrison is their golden boy, their bloodline. When Dad offered the trip to Chloe, he made it a strict condition. He was only paying for real family. He flat out refused to buy a ticket for Lily. He told Chloe that Lily is charity work and she didn't belong on a family legacy trip." My knuckles turned white as I gripped the phone. "And Chloe just agreed?" "Chloe didn't want to miss out on 2 weeks of free caviar and Instagram photo ops in Monaco," Sarah said bitterly. "I heard about it a month ago and ripped into her. I told her to pay for Lily's ticket herself." God knows Dorian makes enough as an architect to cover a kid's fare, but Chloe said if they paid for Lily out of pocket, my dad would throw a fit and it would ruin the vibe of the vacation. She said Lily was too young to appreciate Europe anyway. And Dorian? I choked out, a tear finally spilling over my lashes. What did my son say? He told Chloe whatever she wanted to hear to keep the peace. You know Dorian, Margaret. He's terrified of his wife. He said he'd handle you, and Chloe would handle Lily. Sarah paused. Margaret, I am so sorry. If I lived closer, I would come get her myself. You don't need to do that, Sarah. Lily is exactly where she needs to be right now, with someone who actually loves her. I thanked her and hung up, staring blankly at the dark screen of my computer. The betrayal was multifaceted. Chloe's parents were elitist monsters, yes, but I expected nothing less from them. Chloe was a vain, shallow narcissist again, not a shock. But Dorian, my Dorian. He had sacrificed his own daughter on the altar of his wife's vanity and his father-in-law's bigotry. I wiped my face, took a deep breath to compose myself, and walked back into the living room. Lily was sitting on the carpet, meticulously coloring a picture in a princess book. She looked so small, so incredibly fragile. I sat down on the sofa near her. Lily, sweetheart, can we talk for a minute? She put her crayon down and looked up, her expression guarded. Did I do something wrong, Grandma? No, baby, not at all. You are perfect, I said, sliding down to sit on the floor beside her. I chose my next words with surgical precision. I just wanted to ask you. Earlier, you mentioned a big ship. Did Mommy and Daddy tell you they were going on a ship? Lily bit her lower lip, looking frantically toward the front door as if Chloe might burst through it to punish her. I'm not supposed to talk about it. You can talk to me, Lily. I promise you, you won't get in any trouble. I'm your grandma, and it's my job to protect you. Tears welled up in her big brown eyes, finally spilling over onto her flushed cheeks. I heard them talking in the kitchen last week. Daddy was yelling about money, and Mommy was crying. I asked Mommy if we were going to the beach for Harrison's birthday. She sniffled, rubbing her face with the back of her little hand. Mommy took me into my room and shut the door. She told me that they were going on a special boat to Europe. But she said I couldn't go because I don't have the right kind of blood. She said I wasn't a real Gable or a real Simmons, so I didn't get a ticket. My breath hitched. She told you that? Lily nodded, the tears falling faster now. She said I had to be a good girl and come stay with you. And she said if I cried or if I told you about the boat and ruined Harrison's birthday trip, she would call my old social worker and send me back to the foster home. The room seemed to spin. A ringing started in my ears, drowning out the sound of the television. Chloe had threatened an 8-year-old child with abandonment. She had weaponized Lily's trauma, holding her deepest fear over her head just to ensure she could sip champagne on the Mediterranean without feeling guilty. I pulled Lily into my arms, holding her tightly to my chest. She broke down, sobbing into my shirt. All the fear and rejection she had bottled up for the past week finally pouring out of her. I rocked her, running my hands through her hair, whispering promises that I fully intended to keep. Listen to me, Lily Gable, I whispered fiercely into her ear. You are never, ever going back to a foster home. Do you hear me? You are my granddaughter. You are my blood, in every way that actually matters. And no one is ever going to treat you like this again. As I held her, the crushing sorrow in my chest began to harden, crystallizing into something sharp, cold, and immensely powerful. I wasn't just going to confront Dorian and Chloe when they got back. I was going to dismantle the miserable, superficial life they had built. They had wanted 2 weeks of uninterrupted luxury. I was going to make sure it was the last peaceful vacation they ever took. Monday morning broke with a deceptive brightness, the Illinois sun streaming cheerfully through my kitchen windows. Lily was still asleep upstairs, exhausted from the emotional toll of the previous day. I sat at my oak dining table, a steaming cup of black coffee in hand, staring at the contact list on my phone. I was no longer just a grandmother. I was a retired educator who had spent 30 years advocating for vulnerable children. I knew the system. I knew how to document, how to build a case, and most importantly, I knew who to call. At exactly 8 a.m., I dialed the number for Robert Kensington. Robert was a formidable family law attorney in downtown Chicago, a man I had worked with extensively during my time as a principal when dealing with complex, high-stakes custody disputes. He was sharp, pragmatic, and ruthless when it came to protecting minors. Margaret, his deep, gravelly voice echoed through the speaker. It's been a few years. To what do I owe the pleasure? I didn't waste time on pleasantries. Robert, I need your help. It's about my granddaughter, Lily. My son and his wife have abandoned her with me under false pretenses while they take their biological son on a luxury cruise. But it gets worse. My daughter-in-law threatened Lily with returning her to the foster system to keep her quiet about the trip. There was a brief silence on the line. The rustling of papers stopped. Margaret, are you talking about Dorian? Your son? Yes, I said, my voice hardening. I need to secure emergency guardianship, and I need to know exactly what steps to take to ensure they cannot legally remove her from my home when they return. They have crossed a line, Robert. A dangerous one. I'll have my paralegal email you a retainer agreement immediately, Robert replied, his tone shifting into purely professional gear. I need documentation. Any proof of the trip, the financial transactions, and any evidence of neglect or emotional abuse. Can you get into their house? I have a spare key for emergencies, I confirmed. Go, Robert instructed. Gather her medical records, her social security card, her adoption papers. While you're there, look for anything that points to their long-term intentions. People who threaten to send a child back to foster care rarely do it on a whim. They've likely been researching it. Take photographs. Do not remove anything that isn't directly related to Lily's immediate well-being, but photograph everything. An hour later, my neighbor, a lovely retired nurse named Susan Miller, came over to sit with Lily. I drove across town to Dorian and Chloe's sprawling, 5-bedroom modern farmhouse in the affluent suburbs. Walking into their home felt like stepping into a staged magazine shoot. Everything was sterile, monochromatic, and aggressively expensive. There were massive, professionally framed black and white portraits of Dorian, Chloe, and Harrison adorning the walls of the grand staircase. Not a single photo of Lily was visible on the ground floor. I headed straight for Chloe's home office. It was a pristine space with a sleek glass desk and a massive iMac. I opened the top drawer of the filing cabinet, searching for the folder labeled with Lily's name. I found her birth certificate, her finalized adoption decree, and her pediatric records. But tucked behind those essential documents was a thick, manila envelope without a label. My intuition, honed by decades of dealing with deceptive parents, screamed at me to open it. Inside was a glossy brochure for a place called the Clearwater Behavioral Center, a long-term residential facility in Utah. Attached to the brochure was a printed email chain between Chloe and an admissions counselor. I read the top email, my blood running cold. Dear Miss Davis, thank you for reaching out. Based on your description of Lily's attachment issues and disruptive presence in your home, Clearwater would be an ideal fit. Since the adoption is finalized, we would need to discuss the legal framework for a long-term residential placement or the process of an adoption disruption. We can schedule a Zoom consultation for July 12th, upon your return from Europe. I had to grip the edge of the glass desk to keep my knees from buckling. The cruise wasn't just a vacation. It was a celebration before they executed their final plan. They had deliberately left Lily behind to test the waters of a family dynamic without her. They were going to come back from the Mediterranean, pack her bags, and ship her off to a facility for troubled youth in Utah, essentially discarding her like a defective product they no longer wanted to deal with. I pulled out my phone and took clear, high-resolution photos of every single page of the email chain, the brochures, and the handwritten notes Chloe had scribbled in the margins notes, detailing how much of the adoption subsidy they could retain if Lily was institutionalized. The sickness in my stomach was replaced by a white-hot, furious clarity. Over the next 13 days, while Dorian and Chloe were posting heavily filtered photos of themselves sipping Aperol spritzes in Positano and touring the Colosseum, I was building a fortress around Lily. I took Lily shopping, replacing her frayed, ill-fitting clothes with beautiful, high-quality dresses, sturdy sneakers, and a brand-new customized backpack. We spent our days baking, reading, and visiting the local botanical gardens. Every night, I read her to sleep, reassuring her that she was safe, loved, and exactly where she was meant to be. I watched the anxiety slowly melt from her shoulders. I watched her laugh, a real, uninhibited laugh that echoed through my house. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Robert Kensington was a legal machine. Using the evidence I had provided, combined with the documented threat Chloe had made to Lily, Robert filed an ex parte motion for emergency temporary guardianship. Given the evidence of the planned adoption disruption and the immediate emotional danger to the child, the family court judge granted the petition. Dorian and Chloe had no idea what was waiting for them. The 14th day arrived with a heavy, oppressive heat that mirrored the tension knotting my shoulders. Dorian had texted me the night before from their layover in New York. Flight lands at 2 p.m. Be by to grab Lily around 4. Can't wait to see you. I didn't reply. At 3:45 p.m., I sent Lily next door to Susan's house. I told Lily that Susan needed an expert taste tester for a new batch of brownies, a job Lily took very seriously. I wanted her far away from the fallout that was about to occur. At 4 p.m. on the dot, the silver Range Rover pulled into my driveway. I was sitting in one of the wicker chairs on the porch, a pitcher of iced tea sweating on the table next to me. Inside the house, sitting quietly at my dining table with a thick manila folder, was Robert Kensington. Dorian and Chloe got out of the car. They were deeply tanned, glowing with the specific kind of relaxed entitlement that only a $20,000 vacation can buy. Chloe was wearing a wide-brimmed straw hat and a flowing maxi dress. Harrison was nowhere to be seen. They had likely dropped him off at their house first. "Margaret!" Chloe called out, her voice overly loud and grating. "We are back." Oh, you wouldn't believe the heat in Rome. It was absolutely stifling. Dorian walked up the porch steps, carrying a small, brightly wrapped box. "Hey, Mom, we brought you some authentic Italian olive oil. Where's Lily? We need to get going. Chloe wants to unpack before dinner." I didn't stand up. I didn't smile. I just stared at the son I had raised, searching his face for any trace of the compassionate boy I once knew. There was nothing. "Lily isn't here," I said, my voice eerily calm. Chloe's fake smile faltered. She lowered her sunglasses, peering at me. "What do you mean she isn't here? Is she at a play date?" "Margaret, I specifically texted you that we were coming at 4. "I know what you texted, Dorian," I said, shifting my gaze to my son, "just like I know about the Regent Seven Seas Explorer." The silence that fell over the porch was absolute. The color drained from Dorian's face so fast he looked physically ill. Chloe froze, her hand hovering awkwardly near the brim of her hat. I don't know what you're talking about," Dorian stammered, his eyes darting toward his wife. "The soccer camp." "Stop," I commanded, my voice cracking like a whip. "Do not insult my intelligence by continuing that pathetic lie. I know everything. I know your father-in-law, Dr. Simmons, paid for a luxury cruise for his real family. I know you dragged Harrison across the Mediterranean while you dumped Lily here. But more importantly, Chloe, I know what you said to her." Chloe squared her shoulders, her shock morphing into a defensive glare. "Margaret, you don't understand the pressure we are under. Harrison needed a trip that was just about him. Lily is. She's difficult. She has behavioral issues. It wouldn't have been a vacation for anyone if we brought her." "Behavioral issues?" I stood up, my chair scraping harshly against the wooden deck. "She is a traumatized 8-year-old child, and you threatened to send her back to a foster home if she told me the truth. You terrorized a little girl so you could drink champagne in Monaco?" "She's lying," Chloe snapped, her voice shrill. "She's a manipulative child, Margaret. She makes things up for attention." "Did she make up the Clearwater Behavioral Center in Utah?" I asked, dropping the name like an anvil. Chloe gasped, stepping back as if I had physically struck her. Dorian whipped his head around to stare at his wife, genuine confusion mixing with his panic. "Clearwater? What is she talking about, Chloe?" "You didn't tell him?" I let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Your wife Dorian has been scheduling Zoom meetings with a residential facility. She's planning to institutionalize your daughter, to disrupt the adoption. And you were too cowardly, too blinded by the lifestyle she provides, to even notice." "Mom, look, we can explain." Dorian took a step forward, reaching out. Do not call me Mom, I said, the finality in my voice stopping him dead in his tracks. A mother raises a man with a spine, a man with integrity. I don't know who you are. I turned and opened the front door. Robert, could you come out here, please? Robert Kensington stepped onto the porch, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, holding the thick folder. He didn't look at them with anger. He looked at them with the cold, clinical detachment of a predator observing cornered prey. Dorian, Chloe, this is Robert Kensington. He is my attorney. Dorian's eyes widened in sheer terror. Attorney? For what? As of 9 a.m. yesterday morning, Robert stated, his voice booming across the quiet suburban street. Margaret has been granted emergency temporary guardianship of Lily Gable, pending a full custody hearing. You are legally barred from removing the minor child from her care. He handed a stunned Dorian the official court summons. You can't do this, Chloe shrieked, her carefully cultivated country club persona completely shattering. She is our daughter. You broke into my house. You stole my private documents. I retrieved necessary medical records for a child you abandoned across state lines under fraudulent pretenses. I corrected her coldly. The evidence of your intent to permanently displace her was in plain sight. You can argue the legality of it in family court, Chloe, but I assure you, a judge is not going to look kindly on a mother who leaves an 8-year-old behind to go on a $20,000 vacation, only to plan her institutionalization upon return. Dorian was staring at the legal papers in his hands shaking violently. Mom, please, you're taking my daughter away. You're destroying my family. You destroyed your family the second you left that little girl on my porch with a lie. I fired back, stepping right into his personal space, forcing him to look me in the eye. You chose a luxury cruise over your child. You chose Chloe's toxic parents over your daughter. You are going to pay child support, Dorian. You are going to sign over full legal custody, or Robert will take this to trial, and every single one of Chloe's country club friends will read the court transcripts about how she treats adopted children. I turned to Robert, nodding once. We stepped back inside my home. Get off my property, I told them through the screen door. If you ever come near Lily again without a court order, I will have you arrested for trespassing. I closed the heavy oak door, locking the deadbolt with a resounding click. Outside, I could hear Chloe screaming at Dorian, the ugly, bitter sounds of their superficial marriage fracturing under the weight of reality. I leaned against the door, closing my eyes, letting out a long, shuddering breath. It was done. The war had just begun, but the first battle was won. I walked to the kitchen window and looked out toward Susan's house. Lily was sitting on the grass, laughing hysterically as Susan's golden retriever licked her face. She looked vibrant. She looked safe. I smiled, poured my cold coffee down the sink, and started preparing dinner for my daughter. August arrived in Oak Park with a stifling heat, but the atmosphere inside the Cook County Family Court was colder than a morgue. The weeks leading up to the final custody hearing were a masterclass in narcissistic unraveling. Dorian had tried calling me incessantly, leaving pathetic, tear-soaked voicemails begging me to drop the case so we could handle things as a family. When I blocked his number, Chloe's father, Dr. Gregory Simmons, attempted to intervene. He actually had the audacity to show up at my front door with his checkbook, offering me $50,000 to relinquish emergency guardianship. He wanted me to hand Lily back so they could quietly ship her off to the Clearwater Behavioral Center in Utah, thereby avoiding a public scandal that might tarnish his prestigious reputation at the local country club. I didn't just slam the door in his face. I recorded the interaction on my porch security camera and forwarded the footage directly to Robert Kensington. When the trial date finally dawned, I walked into the courtroom holding Lily's hand tightly until I passed her off to Susan, who waited patiently in the hallway. I took my seat next to Robert. Across the aisle sat Dorian and Chloe, flanked by a team of 3 incredibly expensive, slick-haired corporate lawyers funded by Dr. Simmons. Chloe looked pale and gaunt, her designer clothes hanging loosely on her frame. The stress of being exposed had clearly taken its toll. Dorian just looked entirely broken. The presiding official, Judge Harriet Caldwell, was a no-nonsense woman who had seen every ugly facet of family law. She reviewed the binders of evidence Robert had submitted with a grim, tightening expression. Chloe's lead attorney tried to paint me as an overbearing, vindictive mother-in-law who had orchestrated a kidnapping based on a misunderstanding about a summer camp. He argued that the Clearwater Behavioral Center was simply a specialized boarding school and that Chloe and Dorian were just exploring educational options for a troubled child. Then, Robert stood up. He didn't yell, he didn't perform for the gallery. He simply laid out the timeline with lethal, surgical precision. First, he played the audio of Chloe threatening Lily with a return to foster care, a recording I had managed to capture on my phone when Lily, trembling, recounted the event to a child psychologist Robert had hired. Next, he projected the financial records onto the courtroom monitor. "Your Honor," Robert stated, his voice ringing clearly in the dead silent room. The respondents claimed that the facility in Utah was merely an educational option. However, bank records obtained during discovery show that on June 10th, exactly 5 days before embarking on a $22,000 Mediterranean cruise, Chloe Gable transferred a non-refundable deposit of $15,000 to the Clearwater Behavioral Center. A collective gasp echoed from the back of the courtroom. I looked over at Dorian, his head snapped toward Chloe, his jaw dropping. He hadn't known. She had drained $15,000 from their joint savings account to secure Lily's institutionalization without even consulting him. But the final devastating blow came from the prosecution's star witness. The heavy courtroom doors swung open, and in walked Sarah Simmons, Chloe's own sister. She had flown in from Seattle specifically to testify against her flesh and blood. When Sarah took the stand, Chloe began to hyperventilate. Sarah looked directly at the judge. "My parents and my sister never viewed Lily as a human being, Your Honor. They viewed her as a prop for social media. When she stopped being a cute toddler and started exhibiting normal trauma responses, she became an inconvenience. My father explicitly barred Lily from the family trip, calling her charity work. Chloe agreed to abandon her because she prioritized caviar and photo opportunities over her daughter's psychological safety." Judge Caldwell had heard enough. When she delivered her ruling, her voice was laced with profound disgust. She stripped Dorian and Chloe of all physical and legal custody of Lily, citing severe emotional abuse, abandonment, and an intentional conspiracy to displace a minor child. She granted me full, permanent guardianship. Furthermore, because of the financial discrepancies and the malicious intent, the judge ordered Dorian to pay maximum child support to me, alongside covering the entirety of Lily's future therapy and educational costs. As the gavel slammed down, Chloe completely lost her composure. She screamed at Sarah, calling her a traitor, until the bailiff had to physically restrain her and escort her out of the courtroom. Dorian sat frozen at the defense table, his head buried in his hands, quietly sobbing as the reality of his ruined life washed over him. I didn't stick around to offer condolences. I walked out into the bright hallway, scooped Lily into my arms, and took her out for the biggest ice cream sundae in Chicago. The fallout over the next 6 months was absolute. The country club gossip mill is ruthless. Once the details of the court transcripts leaked, Dr. Simmons and his wife became social pariahs. Unable to handle the embarrassment, they cut Chloe off entirely. The financial strain, combined with the betrayal of the $15,000 deposit, fractured Dorian and Chloe's marriage beyond repair. By Thanksgiving, Dorian had moved into a cramped one-bedroom apartment, and Chloe was selling her designer handbags online to afford her divorce attorney. As for me, my home has never been fuller. The spare room is no longer a spare room. It is Lily's sanctuary, painted a vibrant lavender, the walls covered in her artwork. We spend our weekends planting hydrangeas and reading adventure novels. The fear in her eyes has been replaced by a bright, resilient spark. She knows, without a shadow of a doubt, that she is home. Family isn't defined by shared DNA, a lesson my son learned the hard way when the dust finally settled. Today, Lily is thriving, legally under my care, her trust fund secured, while Dorian and Chloe's superficial marriage collapsed under the weight of their own deceit. Sometimes, the most beautiful chapters of our lives begin only after we have the courage to burn the toxic pages to ash.